Jiu-Jitsu demands a lot from your body. If you're not managing your fatigue correctly, you could be at an increased risk of injury and reduced performance. And worse yet, you could be actually getting worse at Jiu-Jitsu. If you don't know me, my name is Kieren Lefevre, and I've helped thousands of grapplers all around the world get strong, reduce their risk of injury, and manage their fatigue on and off the mats. In this episode, I will be explaining what fatigue is, how to accurately measure your fatigue levels, and provide you with strategies to manage your fatigue. Intuitively, you know what fatigue is. When you feel tired, your performance on the mats is reduced, and despite all of your best efforts, you can't seem to move the way you want to. In the sports science research, fatigue is defined as a phenomenon associated with decreases in physical and cognitive performance and increases in injury occurrence. Grappling, like all combat sports, is incredibly dynamic. It puts a lot of demand on your muscles, your central nervous system, your cardiovascular system, and of course, mental fatigue as well. Because of all of these physical and mental demands, accurately assessing fatigue from grappling is challenging. Fatigue has two categories: central fatigue and peripheral fatigue. Central fatigue is caused by your central nervous system, or your CNS. When you're training, your CNS signals your muscles to perform the work required. These signals from your CNS to your muscles can become fatigued, even though you may not have much muscular fatigue. On the other hand, peripheral fatigue is from the muscle itself. You can feel this fatigue in your muscles after a hard day of sparring or a lifting session in the gym. Peripheral fatigue is characterized by glycogen depletion, lactate accumulation, and the buildup of other metabolites, often accompanied by delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS. Let's suppose that your fatigue levels from grappling are too high and you're not allowing your body to recover adequately. In this case, your risk of injury on the mats increases and can put you in a state of non-functioning, overreaching, and potentially overtraining. After a strenuous training session, your body has a temporary dip in performance due to the fatigue from your training stimulus. Your body then recovers and repairs itself in preparation for the subsequent difficult training demand that you place on it. This cycle is known as functioning overreaching. You have a stimulus that dips your performance, and then your body overcompensates, making you faster, stronger, better. But your body doesn't just repair itself to the same level. It builds back stronger to exceed the previous physical demand. This is known as super compensation. If you undertake another training stimulus, the cycle then repeats itself, and you have this wave of improving performance levels. If you can't recover properly between your workouts, or if the intensity is too high for you to handle, you won't achieve supercompensation, which can lead to a stagnation or even non-functioning overreaching. If you implement strategies for assessing and managing fatigue and a solid training program, you can progress from non-functioning overreaching to functioning overreaching and ultimately achieve supercompensation. There are many ways to monitor your fatigue levels. Each method falls into one of two categories, either subjective method or an objective method. Subjective methods of fatigue assessment rely on questionnaires, on self-selecting your training volume and rating your own fatigue. Objective methods use data from physical measurements and performance-based tests to determine accurately your recovery levels. There are pros and cons to every fatigue monitoring method, and therefore combat sport athletes need to use a combination of objective and subjective methods to paint the most accurate picture of their fatigue levels. Here are some examples of applicable subjective methods for grapplers. Wellness or readiness questionnaires are utilized in all levels of sport, from amateur to professional. There is research to support a correlation between subjective feelings of fatigue and objective biomarkers of fatigue. An example of a recovery survey is available on the Train Heroic fitness app, which I use personally to coach my clients. Before each session, the app will prompt users to complete a readiness survey. This survey asks you to rate various different factors, including your sleep quality, your mood, energy levels, stress, and soreness, and ultimately provides you a readiness score based on your input. These surveys are not super helpful in isolation though, and are more useful to indicate overtraining when assessing long-term trends. An effective questionnaire should be tailored to the individual and customized for the sport. In a jiu-jitsu context, you can ask how many sessions you've done per week. You can ask how well you're understanding and learning the new techniques as a way of measuring your mental stress. You can also include questions about muscle soreness, energy levels, and mood to complete the survey. Fatigue scales are a simplified version of a wellness survey, and they ask you to rate your overall fatigue on a scale between 1 and 10. That's pretty much it. They're incredibly simple. You may have heard the advice before to listen to your body and to gauge your recovery levels subjectively or intuitively, if you will. I find this advice to be incredibly unhelpful. These subjective rating scales, questionnaires, and surveys are trying to quantify that advice and provide more structure and more data to the listen to your body. But at the end of the day, they're essentially doing the same thing. Here are some examples of applicable objective fatigue assessments for grapplers. Heart rate variability, or HRV, measures the differences in the time between your heartbeats. Generally, a higher variability is considered better for your health and indicates that you're fully recovered. Unlike a clock or a metronome, the time between heartbeats is not consistent or predictable. It can vary significantly. When you experience high levels of fatigue, your heart tends to beat at more regular intervals to try and bring order to the chaos that your body's experiencing. This reduces your heart rate variability. HRV can be used as an objective method of determining fatigue, as the higher the HRV, the more recovered you are. You can track your HRV during your sleep with a wearable device like a smartwatch, a Whoop band, or an Oura ring. Another method is utilizing a heart rate monitor and assessing your HRV in the morning after you wake up, or you can also run yourself through a quick test immediately before you're about to train. To conduct this test, you must bring yourself to a fully relaxed state and perform slow and controlled breaths for at least 1 minute while measuring your heart rate. This will then give you an accurate picture of what your HRV is. You can compare it to your baseline and see if you're recovered and prepared for the session that you're about to complete. Research done on using HRV to determine your recovery is far from conclusive, but it's still promising enough for me to recommend HRV as a useful, helpful tool as an objective measure of fatigue. The counter movement jump test is a practical and reliable assessment of your lower body power. This test can determine your recovery levels when you compare it to your established baseline. Place both hands on your hips and keep them there for the test duration. Squat down and jump as high as possible in a vertical plane, landing back where you started from. Do not swing your arms or jump forward. The goal is to achieve the highest vertical jump height possible. The downside to the CMJ test is that you must have a way of accurately measuring your jump height, either via a contact mat, a force plate, an infrared platform, or even a high-speed video analysis system. And you can probably imagine that all of these options are incredibly expensive. In a nutshell, this is not going to be accessible. There is some, albeit limited, research correlating hand grip performance to fatigue levels, but it's still a measure of objective fatigue that we can utilize. This test requires a hand dynamometer. In order to perform this test, follow these steps. Step 1, positioning. Sit upright with your feet flat on the ground and hold your arm at around 90-degree angle close to your body. Your wrist should be neutral, not bent, and your forearm should not be supported by anything. Hold the dynamometer in your dominant hand and squeeze as hard as you can. Maximal effort is required to get an accurate reading. Squeeze for about 3 to 5 seconds. Do not use your upper arm or shoulder to assist you. Record and write down the value shown of the dynamometer after each test. Rest for about 60 seconds between tests and repeat this 3 times through. Then you want to take the average of your 3 attempts, and that is your hand grip baseline. When you're assessing your recovery, perform this again before you're about to train or in the morning, and you can compare it to your baseline and see this as a measure of your fatigue. If it's close to your baseline, then you know that you're good to go. If it's so far below your baseline, then maybe it's an indicator that you need to back off your training. When you experience high levels of peripheral fatigue in the muscle, it's usually accompanied by hormones and metabolites. These hormones and metabolites and lactate accumulation can be tested for via your saliva or other serum biomarker analysis. Specifically, cortisol and testosterone levels in saliva can be used as an objective measure of fatigue, but they're incredibly expensive. I recommend using subjective tests in the form of surveys and fatigue rating and objective testing to determine your recovery levels. A simple recovery assessment protocol could look like this. Complete a fatigue survey before each training session. Monitor your HRV during your sleep with a wearable. Complete a HRV test with a heart rate monitor before you train or first thing in the morning. Test your grip strength using a hand dynamometer and compare it to your baseline average. Review all of these data together to determine your recovery levels and utilize auto-regulation to adjust your training as necessary. Managing your fatigue is managing your training stimulus and intensity. Also means having adequate recovery tools to ensure that you're adapting to your training protocols. These are the three primary pillars of recovery for grapplers. 1. Sleep. 2. Nutrition. And 3. Training intensity. Sleep is the greatest aid to performance and recovery. Countless studies have shown the significance of sleep for performance and recovery. For combat sports specifically, a research study on karate athletes showed that one night of lousy sleep negatively impacted performance, specifically selective attention, focus, and maximal isometric strength. The same research showed that a 30-minute nap effectively overcame the negative impacts of that lousy night of sleep on cognitive and physical performance. The amount of sleep that you need, though, depends on you as an individual, but as a general rule of thumb, I recommend aiming for 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night. But this will also depend on you, your genetics. Sleep is not the most sexy of the recovery strategies that you want to be hearing about, but it is the most effective. If sleep is the most crucial aspect of your recovery, then nutrition is a close second. Carbohydrates and proteins are essential to replenish your body with the energy stores that it needs and to support the muscle repair process to adapt to your training stimulus. All that's to say that you need carbs and you need protein. Around 50% of your calories should be coming from high quality carbohydrate sources to ensure that you're replenishing your glycogen stores. For combat sport athletes, carbohydrates are the main energy contribution during your training. Protein intake should be anywhere from 1.4 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight daily, prioritizing protein with high bioavailability. If you want to take a deep dive into my supplement recommendations for grapplers, then check out my free Jiujitsu supplement database. Link is in the description, or you can check out a video explaining it in the description as well. And if you want me to cover nutrition strategies for combat sports specifically in more detail, let me know in the comments. And if there's enough interest, I'll make sure I cover the topic. One of the most important methods of managing your fatigue is managing your training stimulus. If your training stimulus is too high, your recovery cannot keep up and you'll be in a state of non-functioning overreaching. To avoid this, we need to ensure that you're implementing correct periodization to allow for recovery and adaptation to your training. Similar to fatigue assessments, autoregulation has both objective and subjective measures of determining your fatigue and adjusting your training accordingly. Autoregulation is crucial for grapplers due to the demanding nature of our primary training stimulus, in contrast to those people who just lift recreationally, like bodybuilders or even powerlifters. They typically don't need or don't emphasize autoregulation because the autoregulation is built in with their training program. They're not grappling, so their training stimulus isn't fluctuating week to week. Like fatigue assessments, the two types of autoregulation are objective and subjective. Subjective autoregulation involves assessing how you feel during your training. This can be approached systematically by using tools like rate of perceived exertion, especially when it's combined with reps in reserve. You can adjust your training intensity according to your recovery levels by self-selecting the weight that you lift based on these metrics. Here's an example. If you have an assigned RPE of 8 with an associated RIR of 2, but you choose a weight that causes you to reach muscular failure during that set, then you need to reduce the weight so that you have at least 2 reps in reserve when you complete your set. The actual weight that you're lifting will change week to week based on your recovery levels. It's not going to be a linear progression of beating or even matching your previous week, and that's okay. That is why it's auto-regulation. It automatically regulates your weight that you're lifting. We've established that you can manage your training intensity via auto-regulation, but this cannot overcome the deficiencies of a poor program design. That's where periodization comes into play. Periodization for grapplers is a structured training approach that manipulates variables like intensity, volume to optimize performance and minimize your injury risk. Basically, you can think about it as a systematic approach to putting together training cycles and training phases to build your strength, to build your endurance, your mobility, while addressing the specific demands of grappling. If you're grappling around 3 to 6 times per week, I recommend following a training program designed for grapplers that has you lifting around 2 to 3 sessions per week. Your program structure can take into account many different variables, specifically whether you're preparing for a competition, maybe you're in your off season, or maybe you're a very beginner lifter. All these factors should be considered when selecting your program. Here is a quick summary of the most effective periodization and program structures that I recommend for grapplers. Linear periodization. Linear periodization is often seen as the beginner bodybuilder style program, where you try to increase the weight or the amount of reps that you're lifting at a given session each and every week. Still, the exercises and the aim of the overall training program will remain the same week to week, hence linear progression. Block periodization splits your training into blocks of time, which will each have a different focus. A common way of structuring a block periodization program would be in 4-week blocks. For example, you may have block 1 focusing on general physical preparedness, block 2 on strength, block 3 on power, and block 4 on hypertrophy. Daily undulating periodization. This is a more complex training structure where each day of training, the intensity will undulate or change. For example, Monday could be a high volume, low intensity day. Wednesday, a low volume, high intensity day. This is a more complex periodization model that's great for athletes that are in season because you can undulate or change your intensity to prepare for every weekend being a rugby game, for example. Step loading or wave loading periodization is where you step up your training intensity to a maximum and then bring it back down again. For example, week 1 could be 80% of your 1 rep max, week 2, 90%, week 3, 100% intensity, and then back off down to week 4 for a mini deload, if you will, at 60%. The condensed conjugate method is a 2-day per week or a 3-day per week strength, power, and GPP model. It pairs upper body maximum effort with lower body dynamic effort, and then lower body maximum effort with upper body dynamic effort. If you have a 3-day version of the condensed conjugate method, the 3rd day is generally physical preparedness, usually focusing on posterior chain, as this is an essential focus point for grapplers. Regardless of which program structure you're following, as long as your training accounts for your grappling, includes autoregulation techniques, and is periodized correctly, this will significantly assist you in managing your fatigue. But if you want to find the best program to dominate on the mats, then take my free program quiz. It determines your fitness level, your experience, your training schedule, and recommends the best training program for you to smash your goals on and off the mats. Link is in the description. If you want to excel in Jiu-Jitsu, you must manage your fatigue. This means accurately assessing your fatigue, auto-regulating your training load, and focusing on the 3 primary pillars of recovery, being sleep, nutrition, and training intensity. By implementing all the strategies in this video, you will go from a state of non-functioning overreaching to functioning overreaching and hopefully super compensation. If you got value from this video, it would really help with the YouTube algorithm if you smash that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and drop me a comment. Let me know if you have any questions on anything we've covered today or what topic you want to see me cover in the future. Or if you just want to show me support, drop a fist bump in the comments. Thank you so much for watching.